Today is the 27th day of Tishrei, the 29th of October, and we're holding still in chapter 24. We started looking yesterday at this idea that actually the mashal comes from a higher place than the nimshal, meaning the parable is actually from a higher place than the meaning inside the parable. So the way to think about this is light in vessels, or v'kli. So we have this statement from the Arizal already that the source of the vessels is always higher than the source of the light. Shoresh kelim gavoa mishoresh haorot. So in our case, when you're talking about the parable and its meaning, so the meaning is obviously the light. And the parable, what you couch it in the words, the example that you put it in, that's the vessel that's supposed to hold the idea. So the root of the vessel, the parable, is actually higher. The way this plays out in Kabbalah is what he said here, that it comes from the makif, from the higher encompassing light that is higher than the midos themselves. So let's read it again. V'kisezu, it's like middle of 24 here, on page 256. V'kisezu hu mibchinat hashamayim makifim elyonim shelemala mala ma'amidot v'hu b'chinat sovev kol almin. So this, in general, in Chassidic Kabbalah, like the way that Chassidus sees this, it's called sovev kol almin, the light that encompasses everything. So how does it encompass? So you imagine that on the one hand, everything that we've been talking about, of levels of consciousness in emanation, creation, formation, and action, in Abya, the four worlds, that's like a line. That's like one thing over the other. So it's a linear progression. Anything that's linear, whenever you see linear in Kabbalah and Chassidus, you're talking about what's called memale. Memale means the light that fills. Okay? And the idea about the light that fills is that it's measurable, that it has a measure. You can measure it. It's this much, or it's that much, or it's that much. In terms of consciousness, it's how much of the consciousness over your origin can you contain. So it's not just by chance that people like us, at least me, don't feel our origin in God. We couldn't handle it. Like that's the whole idea, that if I felt my origin, I would completely nullify. There would be nothing left of me. I wouldn't function in the world, put it this way. To be high functioning, you have to be disconnected from the origin in some way, otherwise you're not independent. So that all was a linear progression. So that's the light of the memale. So we have these four levels. But now we're talking about the encompassing light. The encompassing light encompasses everything. So what is it encompassing here? So it's as if it's encompassing and it's coming in between the circle. We designate it like a circle. So the circle is cutting through between the emanation and the bia, between the emanation and three lower worlds. It's like cutting there. And that's the root of the vessels. That's the root of the parable in this case. So the parable is coming from an encompassing light, and from the fact that it's a circle, you see that really it reaches much, much higher. And why do we call this the sky? Because, or the heavens, he said this is like from the Shamayim Elyonim, the supernal heavens, because that's the parable that they used in the ancient world. The ancient world saw the heavens as a kippah, as a dome that's above the earth. Now we see it even better because we changed. That was the Babylonian picture of the universe. The Greek picture is even better because it just sees the earth as a sphere. They saw the earth as flat. So the earth was flat and there's a dome over it. We see the earth as a sphere and there's as many spheres as you want around it. You have plenty of spheres. So it comes from that idea. It's not because it really came from outer space. That's not the idea. The idea is just that we have a sphere, and around it we have space, and the space is, okay, so what shape does the space take? What comes to everyone's mind, even cosmologists, at least in the beginning, is it must be a sphere also. Now they play with all kinds of other crazy, much more elaborate space types of space. Is it a donut? Is it a Mobius strip? Is it this? Is that? And it solves all kinds of problems in cosmology. But in general, the normal way that a person would think about this, if the Earth is a sphere, then everything around it is also spherical. So that's why we call it the heavens, because it's like outside of us. That's where this idea comes from. Ki כי המקיף הוא מקיף ראש ורגל כאחד. לפיכך נעשה למטה בחינת כיסא. He says, what's the most important thing about a circle? That we use it as the designator of a makif, of an encompassing light, is that above and below is the same for it. You can't say which part of the circle is the top and which part of the circle is the bottom. Everything is equal. Every single point on the circle, on the circumference, is equally distant from the center. So there's no one that you can say one is higher, one is lower. And that's the idea here. In practice, it becomes like the parable of the throne, of the chair. And it allows, because of the parable, it now allows what was a higher idea to now be encapsulated in something that is much more understandable, much more presentable, much more graspable. And that's the idea of the chair, that allows me to lower my mind, as it were, to lower my conceptual scheme so that other people can understand it as well. V'inyan, כי שורש הפרסה מחיצוניות בינה שלמעלה מהזה, ונמצא שהיא מבחינת מקיפים, כי מתפארת דאימא נעשה כתר לזה, אלא שלמטה נעשית מסך מתחת רגלי זון. So if we want to be more particular, he says, how are we going to say this? We're going to say that za is the mindset, the small countenance is who we want to explain things to. Psychologically, it means that all of us have an adult inside and we have a child inside. Now, people say, why do I have a child inside? We'll get to that in a second. But let's call the child the immature side of me. It can be immature in many areas. It can be that I'm acting immaturely, it's behavioral immaturity, but it can also be intellectual immaturity. So when a person first looks at the world, he says, oh, the world is, all these good places to eat, and you have to make money, and you go from making money to eating and going back to sleep, and you have this triangle, which is money, food, sleep, money, food, sleep, money, food, sleep, rinse, repeat. I have this whole thing about it. That's what you do in the world. So this person could be working in nuclear physics, but he's immature. He doesn't understand what the world is about. He doesn't get it. Like, that's what he saw. Okay, so he's a child still in this respect. He doesn't understand what life is about. Because what's the point? He's just going to rinse and repeat, just sick and die, and that's it. What did you achieve? He says, oh, I get my meaning from my work. Okay, so maybe if you're in nuclear physics, you get a little bit of meaning from it. What if you're the guy who, I don't know, who cleans up at the morgue? So how much meaning can you get from this? So there must be something more. So to explain that to someone, that there's something more than just doing this circuit in your life, and there's more to it, getting married and having children and raising them and all this, you a lot of times have to give them very good parables. So where do the parables come from? He says, more realistically, this is coming from the makif of Ima. Meaning more exactly, it's coming from the makif of Ima, from the encompassing light that's coming out of Ima. That encompassing light, we'll talk about it, what exactly this is. There's a very famous verse in this week's parsha, last week's parsha that we read, that after Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, they knew they were naked. So they must be naked of something. What did they have before that they didn't feel naked? And now that so usually people assume that it's now that they have das, now that they have consciousness, that's how they became aware of themselves. Who said? Maybe they lost something.
Maybe they lost something?
Yeah, they had something and they lost it. Before they were covered, now they were lost. So in the Zohar it says, what did they lose? They had a covering on them, which was the parable, we'll see in a moment. It's called the Zihara de Imaila. It's called the encompassing light of the mother principle of understanding. And this allowed them to function in the world. But now they lost it. They lost the parable. Losing the parable means the world doesn't make any more sense to you. You don't get it anymore. Like you thought, unfortunately, this is what happens like when somebody's facing a catastrophe in life. So for them, that was a catastrophe. They lost their whole picture of what the world was about. So now that they lost their whole picture, they don't know what to do. That's called being naked. Being naked in the Torah means that I don't have a parable to work with. I don't have something explained to me what life is about. So Hashem said, okay, go search for a new parable. Where are you going to search for it? El Adama shel misham lukach. He's going to send you to Mother Nature. Mother Nature is going to teach you. It's a different parable. It's a completely different parable. It's the work, eat, sleep parable.
Yes.
That's the one you're going to figure out now. And let's see if you... Eventually, he came to his senses. Adam came to his senses. He understood he needed to have new children. And a lot of things happened, changed. But he lost that. It's called the Zihara de Imaila. And it's a very, very important thing. It means that... Where did that come from? He didn't learn it from anyone. So what the Zohar explains is that this was simply in the world. He came into the world, and he came at age 20. He was like a 20-year-old when he was created. And he came with a built-in parable for what the world was about, a built-in understanding. That's what we say. You understand, you have a comprehension of what the world is about. It was built in. We're waiting for this to return, by the way. That's what it says. That in the future, we won't need to teach one another to know God. To know me.
Is it a pasuk?
Yeah, it's a pasuk in Yeshaya. In the future, we won't need to teach one another. Why? Because it will be built into the world. You'll wake up in the morning and it's around you. You feel it.
But if you don't sleep all night, then you can't wake up.
You have the old one. You have to sleep to get the new one. So you gotta. It'll come just from being in the air. It'll be in the air. Like you'll smell it. You'll understand it from just being in the world. But we don't have that now. So now we have to have teaching one another what life is about. The parent teaches the child what the world is about. Now, why do we have an inner child? Because that's what you're saying about waking up. You don't have to go to sleep to have a new parable every day. You have to be a child. What's the difference between a child and an adult? That the child doesn't care for these things, and he can change them as fast as how many sets of clothing does a toddler go through every day? How many sets of clothing does an older person go through during the week? It changes. One, right? So when you're young, you change very quickly. When you're old, you change your set of clothing maybe twice a week, 3 times a week. At most, if you don't go and do sports, you don't change it at all. Maybe there were people like they wake up on Sunday and Shabbos they took off their clothing, and that was the only time they changed it. There's all kinds of stories about this, and I won't get into them. If you have your inner child, so you have renewal all the time. You don't have to go to sleep. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't need to sleep to renew. Like out of nowhere, he comes up with something entirely new. It's called an idiosyncratic mind. The child is the idiosyncratic mind inside the person. So we have a common teacher you see how he is a child. You see like how his whole thinking is idiosyncratic. It's not normal. Like a normal person says, okay, this is the next step. He comes up with something that's, how did he get to this? Because he thinks like a child. Which means he thinks idiosyncratically. He's not locked into a particular understanding. So this is coming from his inner child. But the inner child is causing the mother to come down and give him a new set of clothing, because it's like he soiled the previous ones, or the previous ones are just not interesting anymore. So this exists even now. There are people who have this even now. The parable comes to them from the mother even now. We all have it to some extent, but usually for us it's learning from someone. We hear from someone a good parable and we say, I love the parable of money doesn't grow on trees. That's what I heard when I was young. For 40 years I heard money doesn't grow on trees, doesn't grow on trees, doesn't grow on trees. And then I heard the continuation, which was, money does grow on trees, but trees grow very slowly. Why? Because if you think that money doesn't grow on trees, you'll never invest. And if you don't invest, you'll never get dividends. You'll never get payments from it. And you have to think like a tree. It's exactly the opposite. The parable is that you need to think like a tree. about money. That's exactly okay. So it took 40 years until I heard the continuation, which is it's actually very much a tree. So these parables have to keep coming. You can't stop with them. You have to. So he says their source is all from the Makifim. And every day a person can get a new Makif. Every day a person can get a new encompassing light. So it's like having his mother. His mother comes and teaches him something new. Okay, so we'll end here.
Yeah.